Emily had worked doubles all week. Her feet were blistered. The late-night diner lights stung her eyes, and she kept checking her phone, waiting for any update from the hospital. Her mother's surgery wasn't going well, so when the last customer walked in, she pulled herself together and forced a tired smile. He didn't smile back. The Mafia boss sat alone in the corner booth, hands clasped, eyes distant. Not angry, not intimidating, just unbearably tired, as if he was carrying something heavier than the world. Emily served him with quiet kindness, refilling his coffee before he asked, leaving extra napkins when she noticed his shaking hands, pretending not to see the grief sitting behind his eyes. He barely touched his food, barely said a word, and when he finally stood to leave, he placed the plate down gently with no tip. Emily exhaled shakily. Not disappointment, just exhaustion. She whispered, "It's okay," to no one in particular. But when she lifted the plate, she found a note hidden underneath, folded carefully, placed with intention, as if he needed her to see it more than anything else. Her heart skipped as she opened it. Just one line, written with a shaky hand. "I'm sorry. I needed the money more than you tonight." She frowned, confused, until she saw the back of the note. A hospital wristband. Still warm, still wet with a tear that wasn't hers. And suddenly, Emily understood. This man she'd feared, this man the whole city whispered about, had just buried someone he loved, and in his grief, he didn't have enough left to give. For the first time that night, Emily didn't feel alone. She whispered into the empty diner, "I hope whoever you lost knew you loved them." What she didn't know was that the Mafia boss was standing just outside the window, hearing every word, and realizing someone had seen him not as a monster, but as a person. Stay with me until the end, because what happens when these two cross paths again will change both of their lives in a way neither expected. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now let's get started. The name Vincent Torino carried weight in this city. It echoed through boardrooms and back alleys alike. For 30 years, he had built an empire on respect and fear, commanding loyalty from men twice his size with nothing more than a glance. He wore custom suits that cost more than most people made in a month. His penthouse overlooked the harbor where ships came and went at his word. Politicians answered his calls. Judges knew his name. But tonight, none of that mattered. Vincent sat in his black sedan outside Rosie's all-night diner, watching the neon sign flicker against the rain-streaked windshield. The engine was off. The heater had stopped running 20 minutes ago. His breath fogged the glass as he stared at the warm light spilling from the windows onto the empty street. He had been driving for hours with nowhere to go. The funeral home was closed. The house felt too big, too quiet. Even his men had gone home to their families, leaving him alone with memories that cut deeper than any blade he'd ever faced. Maria had been gone for 3 days now. Not his wife, not his daughter, his sister. The only person who had ever looked at him and seen Vinny instead of Vincent Torino. The woman who called him every Sunday to make sure he was eating enough, who sent him birthday cards with cartoon bears on them, who never asked about his business, but always asked about his heart. The cancer had taken her slowly, then all at once. He had paid for the best doctors, the most expensive treatments, private rooms with views of the park she loved. But money couldn't buy time. Money couldn't buy one more conversation. Money couldn't buy forgiveness for all the years he had been too busy building his empire to simply sit with her. The last thing she had said to him was, "Promise me you'll find something good to do with all that power." He had promised, but he didn't know how to keep promises like that. He only knew how to take, how to control, how to make problems disappear. The diner's door chimed as someone walked out, breaking his thoughts. A man in work clothes hurried to his truck, collar turned up against the wind. Through the window, Vincent could see the waitress cleaning tables. Young, maybe 25. Her movements were slow, careful, like someone trying not to break under the weight of exhaustion. He watched her for a long time. She reminded him of Maria at that age, working 2 jobs to put herself through nursing school. Always tired, but never bitter. Always kind even when the world wasn't kind back. Vincent's phone buzzed. Another message from his lieutenant asking about tomorrow's meeting. Another decision that needed his attention. Another piece of business that required Vincent Torino to be sharp, cold, untouchable. But tonight, he wasn't Vincent Torino. Tonight, he was just a man who had lost the only person who really knew him. And that man was hungry for something that had nothing to do with food. He stepped out of the car into the rain. The diner smelled like coffee and grease and something familiar that reminded him of childhood. The waitress looked up when the bell rang, and her smile was automatic but genuine. The kind of smile that came from years of practice but hadn't lost its warmth. "Good evening," she said, grabbing a menu from behind the counter. "Sit anywhere you'd like." Vincent chose the corner booth, the one that gave him a view of both doors. Old habits. But as he settled into the cracked vinyl seat, he realized he wasn't checking for threats. He was checking to make sure no one would see him if he broke down. The waitress approached with a coffee pot and a cup that had seen better days. "Coffee to start?" she asked. Her voice was soft, tired in a way that matched his own exhaustion. "Please," she poured without spilling a drop, despite the slight tremor in her hands. Vincent noticed the way she kept glancing at her phone on the counter, worried about something. Someone. "Long night?" he asked, surprising himself. Vincent Torino didn't make small talk with waitresses, but the man sitting in this booth wasn't Vincent Torino. "Long week," she admitted, then caught herself. "Sorry, you don't need to hear about that. Can I get you something to eat? Whatever's good." "I trust you." She nodded and walked away, leaving him alone with his coffee and his thoughts. The liquid was bitter, overbrewed, perfect. It tasted honest in a way that most things in his life didn't. When she returned with a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, she set it down gently. No rush. No hurry to get him out the door, even though closing time was approaching. She refilled his coffee without being asked, left extra napkins when she noticed his hands weren't quite steady. She didn't ask questions. Didn't try to fill the silence with chatter. She simply existed in the space around him, with a kind of quiet grace that reminded him of Maria sitting beside his hospital bed when he'd been shot 5 years ago. Present without being intrusive, caring without expecting anything in return. The food grew cold on his plate. He managed a few bites, but his appetite had died with Maria 3 days ago. Everything tasted like ash now. Everything felt hollow, but the kindness didn't feel hollow. The way this young woman moved through her exhaustion to take care of a stranger, the way she pretended not to notice when his eyes filled with tears he couldn't shed, that felt real in a way nothing else had for days. When it came time to pay, Vincent reached for his wallet and felt the weight of everything he couldn't say. This woman had given him something precious without knowing it. She had treated him like a person instead of a reputation. She had been gentle with his grief without even knowing it existed. Knowing it existed. But how could he leave nothing? His wallet was thick with hundreds, thousands even. Money meant nothing to him. He could buy this entire diner without checking his bank balance. Yet something about taking from this woman felt wrong. Something about adding to her burden when she was already carrying so much. Vincent stared at the check. $18.50. The cost of a meal that had meant nothing to him but had been prepared with care by someone who understood exhaustion. Someone who moved through her own pain to ease his. His hand moved to his wallet, then stopped. The bills felt heavy, tainted. Every dollar in there had come from fear, from violence, from a world that this woman deserved to stay untouched by. How could he pollute her kindness with dirty money? How could he drag her into his darkness, even through something as simple as a tip? Instead, he pulled out a piece of paper from his jacket pocket, the hospital discharge papers from Maria's final visit. He tore, off a corner, the part with the wristband still attached. His hands shook as he wrote, each word feeling like a confession he had never made to another living soul. The note said everything and nothing. It was an apology for taking her kindness without giving back. It was an admission that even someone with all the power in the world could feel powerless. It was a recognition that sometimes the richest person in the room was also the poorest. He folded the paper carefully, placed it under his plate, and walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last. Behind him, he could hear the soft sound of the waitress moving between tables, still working, still caring, still giving, even when she had so little left to give herself. The bell chimed as he stepped into the night air. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, reflecting the diner's neon glow in fractured patterns on the asphalt. Vincent stood outside the window, hidden in the shadows, watching as Emily approached his table. He saw her pause when she noticed the empty plate, saw her shoulders sag slightly when she realized there was no money waiting for her. But there was no anger in her posture, no frustration, just acceptance, the kind of weary resignation that came from disappointment becoming routine. Then she lifted the plate and found his note. Vincent watched her unfold it slowly, carefully, as if it might crumble in her hands. He saw her frown as she read his words, saw confusion cross her face. Then she turned the paper over and found the hospital wristband, and everything changed. Her free hand went to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears that had nothing to do with her own exhaustion. And when she spoke into the empty diner, her words cut through the glass and the night air and straight into the place where Vincent kept his grief. I hope whoever you lost knew you loved them. For 30 years, Vincent Torino had been untouchable, unreachable, a man who lived behind walls of money and power and fear. No one had seen past the reputation to find the person underneath. No one had looked at him and recognized the weight he carried, until tonight. Until this tired waitress in a rundown diner saw his pain and responded not with judgment, but with compassion. Not with fear, but with understanding. She had taken his grief and held it gently, the way she had held his coffee cup, the way she had moved through her own exhaustion to care for a stranger. Vincent pressed his palm against the cold window and felt something crack inside his chest. Not break, but crack open, like ice melting after a long winter, like a door that had been locked for decades finally opening. Maria would have liked this woman, would have seen in her the same quality that had made Maria become a nurse despite their father's objections, the same instinct to heal instead of harm, to give instead of take, to see people as they really were instead of what the world said they should be. Vincent pulled out his phone and scrolled to his contact list. His lieutenant's name was at the top, marked urgent. Below that, a dozen other men waiting for orders, for decisions, for the machine of his empire to keep turning. But tonight, the machine could wait. Instead, he opened his notes app and began typing. Not orders, not business, but something else entirely. A list of names, people he had hurt, families he had destroyed, debts that couldn't be paid with money but might be paid with action. The first name on the list was Marcus Chen, a restaurant owner who had refused to pay protection money 3 years ago. Vincent had burned down his place 2 days before Christmas. The man had rebuilt, but he had never recovered. His daughter had been forced to drop out of college. His wife had left him. The second name was Angela Rodriguez, a single mother whose son had gotten mixed up with Vincent's organization. When she tried to pull him out, Vincent had made sure the boy disappeared. Not killed, just gone. Shipped to another city where he would never find his way home. The third name was Father Michael O'Brien, the priest who had spoken out against Vincent's businesses from the pulpit. Vincent had made sure the church lost its funding, that the soup kitchen closed, that the shelter for homeless veterans shut down. Each name was a weight he had been carrying without realizing it. Each one was a choice that had made him richer and more powerful and more alone. Each one was a betrayal of the promise he had made to Maria in her hospital bed. Vincent looked up from his phone and saw Emily wiping down tables inside the diner. Her movements were slower now, more careful. She looked like she was holding something precious, something fragile. She looked like she was holding his grief alongside her own and finding it not too heavy to bear. That was when Vincent understood what Maria had meant. The power wasn't in the taking. It wasn't in the fear or the control or the empire he had built on other people's broken dreams. The power was in what he chose to do with all of it. The power was in the choice between adding to the world's pain or finding a way to heal it. He scrolled back to the top of his contact list and found the number he needed. It rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. Marcus Chen. The voice was cautious, suspicious. Phone calls after midnight rarely brought good news in his world. Mr. Chen, this is Vincent Torino. Silence. Then the sound of someone sitting up in bed. Alert now. Afraid. I'm calling about your restaurant, the one that burned down 3 years ago. Vincent's voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. I want to make this right. More silence. Then carefully. I don't understand. I'm going to rebuild it. Bigger than before. Better than before. And I'm going to pay for your daughter's college tuition. All 4 years. Whatever school she wants to attend. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Vincent looked through the diner window at Emily, who was now counting her tips at the register. The small pile of bills and coins that would barely cover her gas money home. The meager earnings from a night of caring for strangers who rarely cared back. Because someone reminded me tonight that even when we have nothing left to give, we can still choose kindness. And I want to choose it while there's still time. Marcus Chen answered the phone on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep and suspicion. Vincent could hear him moving around, probably getting dressed, probably wondering if this was the call that would change his life forever. Mr. Torino, I don't know what you want, but my family and we've moved on. We don't want any trouble. There won't be any trouble, Vincent said, his voice softer than it had been in years. I'm calling because I owe you something. Your restaurant, your daughter's future, the life I took from you when I burned down everything you'd built. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither man knew how to cross. Vincent could hear Marcus breathing, could almost feel the fear radiating through the phone line. How many nights had this man lain awake wondering when Vincent would come back to finish what he'd started? I don't understand, Marcus finally whispered. 3 years ago, I destroyed your life because you wouldn't pay me money you didn't have. Tonight, someone showed me what it means to give when you have nothing left. I want to rebuild what I destroyed. Your restaurant, bigger than before. Your daughter's education, whatever school she wants. No strings attached. No favors owed. Just a man trying to make right what he made wrong. Vincent could hear Marcus crying now. Soft sounds that carried the weight of 3 years of struggle and shame and sleepless nights. The sounds of a man who had carried his family's burden alone and never expected anyone to care. Why now? Marcus asked. After all this time, why now? Vincent looked through the diner window at Emily, who was stacking chairs on tables with the careful precision of someone who had done this routine 1,000 times before. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and she glanced at it with the same worried expression she'd worn all evening. Because someone reminded me tonight that kindness doesn't require wealth. It doesn't require power. It just requires the choice to see someone else's pain and decide to ease it instead of adding to it. The conversation lasted another 20 minutes. Marcus asked questions Vincent couldn't fully answer, made demands Vincent had no right to negotiate. But by the end, they had an agreement. By the end, Vincent had taken the first step toward becoming the man Maria had always believed he could be. After he hung up, Vincent made 7 more calls. To Angela Rodriguez, whose son he would find and bring home. To Father O'Brien, whose church would reopen with a donation large enough to run the soup kitchen for the next decade. To families whose breadwinners had disappeared into his organization's machinery and never returned home. Each call was harder than the last. Each conversation required him to admit to crimes that could destroy him if the wrong people were listening. But with every apology, every promise to make things right, Vincent felt something heavy lifting from his chest, something that had been suffocating him for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. The last call was to his attorney. "Richard, I need you to draw up some papers. I'm dissolving the organization. All of it. The legitimate businesses get sold. Proceeds go to a foundation I'm establishing. The illegal operations get shut down. The men get severance packages and job placement assistance if they want to go straight." His lawyer's voice was sharp with alarm. "Vincent, you can't be serious. Do you know what you're saying? Do you know what this means? It means I'm finally doing what I should have done 30 years ago. This is career suicide. Financial suicide. You'll have nothing left." Vincent looked at Emily through the window. She was counting her tips now, the small pile of crumpled bills and loose change that represented hours of hard work and genuine care for strangers who rarely appreciated it. She looked tired, but not defeated, poor, but not bitter, alone, but not lonely. "I'll have something I've never had before," Vincent said quietly. "I'll have a clear conscience." The next morning, Vincent drove to the cemetery where Maria was buried. Her grave was covered with flowers from the funeral 3 days ago, bright colors that seemed too cheerful for the gray October sky. He sat on the damp grass beside her headstone and told her everything, about the diner, about Emily, about the note he'd left, and the words that had cracked open something inside him he'd thought was dead forever, about the calls he'd made and the promises he intended to keep. "I know what you'd say," he whispered to the marble stone. "You'd say it's about time. You'd say you never understood how I became someone so different from the boy you grew up with. The boy who gave you his lunch money when kids at school were picking on you. The boy who walked you home every day even when his friends made fun of him for it." A wind picked up, rustling the flowers and carrying the scent of rain. Vincent pulled his coat tighter and kept talking. "I lost him somewhere along the way, Maria. I lost him in the anger after Dad died. I lost him in the need to prove I was strong enough to protect you. I lost him in the first time I hurt someone and realized how much power that gave me over everyone else." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. Maria at her nursing school graduation, beaming in her white cap and uniform, proud and hopeful, and so alive it hurt to look at. Vincent had missed the ceremony. Some business crisis that seemed earth-shatteringly important at the time, and now felt like nothing more than an excuse to avoid feelings he couldn't control. But that waitress last night, she saw him. Somehow, through all the blood and money and reputation, she saw the boy who used to walk you home from school, and she was kind to him even though she had every reason not to be. Vincent placed the photograph against the headstone and stood up. His knees protested, reminding him that he was 58 years old and had spent too many years carrying weight that wasn't meant to be carried alone. "I'm going to find her again, Maria. Not to bother her or drag her into my world, but to thank her, to let her know that her kindness mattered, that it changed something that I thought couldn't be changed anymore." He walked back to his car, leaving the photograph where Maria could see it. For the first time since her funeral, he felt like she was still with him, not in some supernatural way, but in the choices he was making, in the man he was trying to become. The drive back to the city took him past construction sites where his money had built casinos that destroyed families, past neighborhoods where his influence had closed schools and opened drug corners, past the courthouse where judges he'd bought had sent innocent men to prison and let guilty ones walk free. By tonight, it would all be different. By tonight, he would be just another man with regrets and a bank account that meant nothing compared to the weight of all the lives he'd ruined. But for the first time in 30 years, Vincent Torino felt like he might be able to sleep without seeing their faces in his dreams. That evening, he parked outside Rosie's all-night diner again. Same corner booth visible through the window, same neon sign casting its glow on the wet pavement. But everything felt different now. The diner looked warmer somehow, more welcoming, less like a place to hide and more like a place to be found. Emily was working again, moving between tables with the same careful grace he remembered from the night before. She looked tired still, but there was something lighter in her movements, something that suggested maybe her mother's surgery had gone better than expected. Maybe the phone call she'd been waiting for had finally brought good news instead of more worry. Vincent sat in his car for a long time, watching her work and thinking about what he wanted to say. How did you thank someone for saving your soul without sounding like a crazy person? How did you explain that their simple kindness had undone 30 years of carefully constructed armor? Finally, he got out of the car and walked toward the diner. The bell chimed as he entered, and Emily looked up from the coffee pot she was refilling. Her eyes widened slightly when she recognized him, but there was no fear in her expression, just curiosity and maybe a touch of concern. "Good evening," she said, her voice warm despite her obvious fatigue. "Same. Table as last night?" Vincent nodded and settled into the corner booth. Emily approached with coffee and the same gentle presence that had made him feel human 24 hours ago. "How are you feeling today?" she asked as she poured his coffee. The question was simple, but her eyes held the weight of someone who had read his note and understood its meaning. "Better," Vincent said, and realized it was true. "Much better, actually. I wanted to thank you for what you said last night, about hoping she knew I loved her." Emily's cheeks flushed slightly. "I didn't know you were still there. I'm sorry if I overstepped." "You didn't overstep. You gave me something I needed to hear, something I couldn't give myself." Vincent wrapped his hands around the coffee cup, feeling its warmth seep into his palms. "Your kindness last night, it changed something in me. Something I thought was too broken to fix." She sat down across from him, abandoning her usual professional distance. "Can I ask what happened? Who you lost?" "My sister," Vincent said, the words coming easier than they had in days. "She was the only person who still saw good in me, the only one who believed I could be better than what I'd become." Emily nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. "My mother had surgery yesterday. Touch and go for a while. I kept thinking about all the things I should have said to her. All the time I wasted being angry about things that didn't matter. Is she okay?" "She's going to be fine. Got the call this morning that she's stable and recovering well." Emily smiled, and Vincent saw tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. "But for a few hours there, I understood what it felt like to carry that weight. The weight of losing someone who matters more than anything else in the world." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two people who had found each other in their darkest hours and discovered they weren't as alone as they'd thought. "I need to tell you something," Vincent said finally, "about who I am, about the life I've been living. You deserve to know what kind of man you showed kindness to." Emily held up a hand, stopping him. "I know who you are, Mr. Torino. Everyone in this city knows who you are." Vincent felt his stomach drop. "Then why were you kind to me? Why didn't you call the police or refuse to serve me or—" "Because grief doesn't discriminate," Emily said quietly. "Because when I looked at you last night, I didn't see a reputation or a business or whatever people say about you. I saw someone who was hurting in a way I recognized, someone who needed the same thing I needed, to be seen as a person instead of a problem." Vincent stared at her, amazed by the simplicity of her wisdom. This young woman, who probably made less in a year than he spent on suits, had just articulated something that had taken him 58 years to understand. "I'm dissolving everything," he said. "The whole organization, everything I built on, other people's suffering. I'm giving it all away and trying to make right what I made wrong." Emily reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her fingers were warm and steady, anchored by a strength he was only beginning to understand. "That's going to be hard," she said. "Probably the hardest thing you've ever done." "Probably," Vincent agreed. "But last night you showed me that sometimes the hardest thing is also the right thing. And my sister always said I was stronger than I gave myself credit for." Emily squeezed his hand gently. "She sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. And she would have liked you very much." They talked until the diner closed that night. About Maria and her mother. About the weight of carrying other people's pain and the surprising lightness that came from sharing it. About second chances and the courage it takes to choose differently when everything inside you says it's too late. When Emily finally locked up, Vincent walked her to her car. Not because she needed protection, but because for the first time in decades, he wanted to make sure someone else got home safely without expecting anything in return. "Will I see you again?" Emily asked as she fumbled with her keys. "I'd like that," Vincent said. "But next time I'm leaving a proper tip." Emily laughed, the sound carrying across the empty parking lot like a promise that broken things could still make beautiful music. 6 months later, Vincent's foundation had helped rebuild 17 businesses, reunited 12 families, and funded scholarships for 43 kids whose parents had been caught in his organization's web. Emily's mother made a full recovery, and every Friday night, Vincent still came to the diner. Not as a man hiding from his reputation, but as someone learning that redemption tastes better when shared with a friend. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply see someone's humanity when the world has forgotten they have any. Sometimes a moment of kindness between strangers can crack open hearts that seemed permanently closed. And sometimes, the person who needs saving the most is the one everyone assumes is beyond hope. What moment of unexpected kindness changed your life? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible true stories that remind us we're all just people trying to find our way home.